Hello.
Hi, and welcome everyone to our podcast called Soul and Science, where we unite Western psychology with Eastern wisdom. Today, my name is Nyana, and I am a trauma therapist, and I am speaking with Ardaas ji, who is an international trainer in ancient wisdom, and he will tell you more about himself. Our experience of episode one was brilliant. We are in season one, and our essence of our topics are our relationships, the relationships that we live. Most of us look at relationships between two people, but our focus here is on our relationship with ourselves. Our area of focus today and conversation is on our relationship with our words and our voice. So, in this moment, I'd like to speak to and invite Ardaas ji to share a little bit about himself before we begin.
Well, hello everyone. I am Ardaas Singh. I don't know if I need to introduce myself much, but I am from Spain. I live in Portugal, and I was born in a family of yogis. So I am very much in tune with India. So I'm very happy to be part of this project with Nyana here. And yes, relationship to the voice, I think that's going to be very interesting today. Words and voice. And the last podcast we did, relationship to the mind, which is possibly one of the most intimate things that we have and that we associate, that we connect with. And the mind thinks in images and words. So the way we communicate and the way our words come out of our mouths is going to say something about how our mind is. So it seemed natural that after talking about the relationship to the mind, that we would cover this relationship to the words, to the voice, to the sound, to the speaking, to listening, to all that.
Yeah. Thank you, Ardash. You're absolutely right. When you think of mind, we think it holds the language center of the brain, right? Um, it is in the brain, and then mind is. We've talked about the different kinds of minds in the past, and that, like you rightly said, mind thinks in images and words. And psychology really looks at it as what language are we giving these images, and what language are we giving, or words are we giving to this experience that has now been made into an image or a memory, and things like that, and what that does really to the internal landscape of an individual and how they perceive life. So psychology actually looks at it as we have these belief systems that are created earlier on childhood. So we have an event, and in order to survive, which is our basic need, safety and survival and stability, we start creating these we notice these events, and these events we start trying to make sense of it. We give it some language through the words we receive, and then that becomes a story and narrative of the way things are in our experience. And then we give words to that. And then those words and beliefs become narratives, and we end up living out those narratives. And we consider that to be sort of reality. And that we are constantly in this experience of creating a narrative with these words. And much of this is sort of unconscious. And therefore, a lot of our responses are unconscious. We may think we are consciously reacting and responding, but we're not. And I see you smile here. I'm going to let you say what's showing up for you in this moment as I say that from a perspective of ancient wisdom.
Well, more than the perspective of ancient wisdom, I was thinking the perspective as a trainer, because I train consultants and therapists. And one of the exercises that we sometimes do is when somebody is speaking, repeat what they are saying back to them. That's a kind of like a mirroring exercise that we often do to gain empathy with the client. But there's one exercise in which we listen to everything they have said and we choose the most unconscious word, and then we repeat it back to them. So only that word, and maybe we build a question around that word, but we will take that word and then we'll talk about that. And that's very significant because it often brings the conversation in possibly in a few avenues that are very interesting, but it definitely for starts, it makes the conversation deeper.
Mm.
So because we are talking about subconscious or even unconscious words, they are below the surface. So the conversation that starts as small talk very quickly you pick something that is below the surface, then let's talk about that. And by bringing it to the surface, by bringing it to the awareness, then you amplify that concept. And
Mm,
what generally we find is two avenues, that one either something hidden and something that they are trying not to pay too much attention to, like a very small voice within them. And the smallest thing in us and the essence of us, we say, is like the soul. So sometimes the soul speaks in the smallest voice. So they say a big thing with a lot of value and they give emphasis to this and to that, but then they say a little thing, and then you take it back and then you amplify it, and it's like giving energy and power to the voice of the soul. That's generally one thing that can happen. The other thing that often happens is that you touch upon something that is incongruent. And we
mm,
have these inconsistencies and imbalances and these harmonies within us, basically in the narratives that we are saying, like you were mentioning, no? And we have these inner voices that they are telling us things, and some of them are in conflict with others. And some of them are going to serve our path and our soul, our destiny, and some are going to be conflicting. And that's why sometimes we enter into doubt or confusion, or we just sabotage ourselves. So by asking about this little thing that is most unconscious, it helps to bring it to the surface. And then it's like, no, no, I didn't mean that. Well, that's what you said. So what did you mean if you didn't mean that? And it forces people to actually, do I really believe that? Is that real for me? Why did I say it then if I don't mean it? So brings to the surface something that is hidden, and maybe realize that this is silly. So we can let it go, and only nurture those which are gonna be in the path of my destiny. No.
yeah. Because I think that's really important what you said there, because bringing it back to psychology from a different, so one is at the level of the conscious, unconscious mind and subconscious. But right now, we're talking a lot in the world of psychology about parts and subpersonalities, and how these parts and subpersonalities have their individual beliefs and narratives, and sometimes they are conflicting, like you said. And so, even recognizing that while we are whole, we're also some of our parts in some ways. At least that's what psychology today is sort of emphasizing, and that they have roles or desire to obviously protect. The bottom line is survival. And so sometimes you will hear a belief or a conversation, some words that a client, like a person may say, and I'm going to take it outside of what might appear in a therapy room to the larger world when two people are interacting, where sometimes it's something that I sit and do with myself as well, is, oh, who is that who's speaking, or who is that who believes this within me? And very quickly today, it's possible to identify, oh, that's a subpersonality that was created, like a problem solver, for example. And then what words that part uses is very logical, analytical to do, and wants to fix problems versus, like you said, the soul's voice, which is very different and very free, very soft. And the choice of words also get changed based on who's speaking, um, and picking up on that in our own consciousness and sitting with our own words that we use can be such a incredible experience of getting to know ourselves and what is happening for someone else, um, because the words then really point out to something that's happening within the person.
Yeah, already the way you were talking is to be able to identify that a part of me is saying something different, like, oh, who is that in me that is speaking? That takes a lot of self-awareness.
Mm.
Not everybody has that capacity to catch when there is different dialogues within us, no, different voices from these different parts or subpersonalities. So, is there anything that you do in your practice with your clients to teach them how to train them to be self-aware of these different voices? Is there some exercises that you recommend for that?
Yeah, we actually just sit in. I ask them, do you hear voices? And that's different because one is conscious voices, one is hallucinations, and we keep that separate and out of this conversation here today because that's a whole different thing. But if my client says there are a lot of like conflicting thoughts in my head, then I ask them to usually draw them out and give them characteristics. And then so then they label them saying that, oh, that's angry part, that's that critic that's always shouting at me and criticizing me, and that voice has different words from this voice that tells me, oh, it's okay and it's all right. And so then the client begins to recognize that there is somebody who's observing these voices when he can see
Correct.
that. And that
Yeah.
observer then has a choice whether they want to listen to these, and where these voices may have come up. They are older voices from childhood. They have beliefs. They came up for a reason. And they all are working to keep this little person that may have been at perceived risk in childhood or actual risk in childhood safe. And therefore the words are used in to do something for that person. And so that's really what we kind of do for the client, or with someone who comes in to therapy.
I think that's kind of connected to what we were saying the other day, because this idea that by them observing these different voices speaking, they notice that they are observing those voices. That's kind of, we mentioned the other day that we, the consciousness, observe the mind. So we are not the mind, but we can observe the mind. And therefore, if the mind is something that we can observe and we can choose in a way, what do we want to listen to? Listening comes, we were talking about this, now listening comes so relevant to this topic of voices. But then, okay, there's these voices in me. Okay, and actually, maybe some of these voices are not even mine. Maybe they come from the past. Maybe they are inherited from my mother or my grandma, or who knows. And maybe even some voices are from, we believe in yoga, from the outside as well. The environment around where we are, there's a electromagnetic field and there's some vibrations. And if you're in an environment where there's a lot of angry people, there will be angry voices coming, surfacing in our mind. And then we think, oh, that's my voice. But why do you think it's yours? Just because you perceive it? We have this incredible antenna, no, the brain, and it's very sensitive to these fields around. And that's why you can find yourself in a demonstration outside with thousands of people, and then you will do things, and then you will regret doing those things. Like, I'm not that kind of person, but you went into the wave, no, and you started thinking like them and behaving like them. This kind of mass psychology. I think that's no, there's a study of that. But it can be even like that. You could even hear their voices within, and if you identify with the mind, then you think it's you who's thinking that, so you act upon that. So just by doing this exercise that you are suggesting, just looking at it from the outside and say, well, who is watching those voices? Well, that is who you are, not the voices themselves. So you can choose to listen to the voice or not. So that's powerful.
Yeah, but what I find interesting are the two areas that really um, have stayed with me or really excite me, I think, what I'm passionate about is the impact of the words that we use on ourselves and on others, and the power of words.
Right.
And so many times we're just using words unconscious of the power they hold in creating our reality, for example. And therefore, what are these words that we are hearing in the voice? If we just even call them thoughts to keep them more like neutral, um, what is that doing to my physiology when I'm hearing a negative voice in my head all the time telling me something? And then I'm beginning to feel anxious and scared. And that's how I'm responding to the world. And then my reality changes.
And
And
I am feeding that voice. The problem is that we may all at some point, we may all have heard these voices, but some people feed them. Some people will put all their energy into it and allow it to grow and allow it to become like a loop, and it becomes more powerful. That's when it starts to come into the body, and then you like somatize some diseases and so on. But that's in a way, I was going to say a choice, but sometimes it's not a choice. We did it because of whatever reason, survival, or because we learned it from our parents, or whatever reason. But we feed those voices, so we don't have to feed the voices, but that's the tendency generally.
yes, I mean,
So yeah, this creative aspect of the words. I was just thinking how we there is this line, no, in the beginning was the word was with God, the word is God. Yeah, and you can find it in, I think this is from the Bible, but you can find it, I think it's in the Rig Veda, that almost a direct line, exactly the same, but just in the beginning was Prajapati the Brahman, no, and things like that, with a different language, but it's the same. So in the beginning was the word is God. And this idea that in yoga we say God is God.
Mm,
So it's not about, some guy with a long beard and a cloud. It's about a generating principle, an organizing, and a destructive principle. And if you look at it like that, words are God. And in
mm,
fact, they have godlike power. Words can create realities, can move, transform, change the reality of anybody,
mm,
and it can destroy a reality. One word said in the wrong way, it can destroy a relationship very, very quickly, very easily. A word that is said by your mother, your father, somebody close to you can get stuck and be part of your subconscious story, narrative, drama that you live again and again for life. You can stay the whole life thinking about that word that your father said, or your mother said, or your partner said, or whatever. So words have godlike power in some way, and that's fundamental. So if we recognize that they have this creative, organizing, and destroying power, then first of all, can we take more care of the words and pay attention to them and choose them more carefully? So
I,
consciousness.
yeah, I think that's such an important and powerful um, thing to think about, because most of us don't recognize that these words create our reality. We How we believe things, how we create these narratives based on the events that occur around us. And as children, we probably have no other way but to create meaning. And then we add words to that, that this behavior means that this person doesn't love me and therefore I'm unlovable. And therefore that becomes my narrative. And that's how I show up in the world. And that gives me either pain, sadness, and things. And then I'm operating, and then my words could be more, will demonstrate that, which then puts us in that position of how do we listen, because words have the power to then reiterate and keep saying I'm unlovable. And that's what you hear in the words that are being said, in the way I talk to myself, and that whole self-deprecating reality that we create for ourselves. And we begin to believe these words that were once told to us in passing by a parent in their anger, which has no truth but has a lot of power. And that then becomes the power, like you said, to generate and organize or destruct. And how how we are living that over and over again, and calling it a painful existence. But the other part of that is also how words in itself have frequencies. And I know that you have a lot of knowledge around this bit, and I was wondering if you could share, because this is something I learned from you actually, and has made me very mindful of the words that I'm consciously using, and kind of saying, okay, do I really even, is that my truth? Is that what I'm really trying to say? And am I using low frequency words or high frequency words, and how that changes my internal landscape to how I'm feeling about myself,
Mm.
show up in the world. So I just wanted, your perspective on that.
Well, we cannot really see inside somebody's head. So what we have is what comes out of it, and what comes out most evidently are the words. There is also body language and voice tone and other subtle cues, and nonverbal speech happening as well. But the words is the most immediate thing that we have. So this this suffering that you were talking about, no, whatever suffering we are going through, we can communicate that through the words. And maybe if we are feeling very small, and so this self-deprecating you were mentioning, no, like becoming, oh, I have no value, I have no weight, I have no meaning, I'm useless in this world. Why do I exist? There's no place for me in this world. Now that's going to manifest in the words that come out of your mouth, but it's going to give us clues also of something virtuous. So that the very same words which are lyrical, they have the clue how they could become virtuous. So sometimes if we listen to them, to this vibration of the words that you are saying, but also the quality of them, is going to tell you, for example, when somebody is becoming small, are they becoming small in a way of humility, or are they self-humiliating themselves? And that line between humility and humiliation is very, very narrow. It's very, very fine line, but you can feel when the person crosses it through the words that they speak.
Mm.
So when we listen to somebody, and everybody will have their own character, like you were saying. So somebody will be more into that line, self-deprecating or something like that. Another one will be more into the innocence, which turns into naivety.
Mm.
Or another one will be into somebody who is so good, wants to help people, but then they take advantage of them, and so on. So there's different lines around the different axis of personality that we can observe, and we can hear when somebody crosses it into the let's say the low frequency side, if you want to use that language, no? But the thing is, when we notice that, then we also know what is the other side of that axis. So if
Mm.
somebody's going into the self-deprecation and the humiliation, well, we know the virtue is humility. So it's not about just make them feel and believe that they are big, because a part of them is not going to believe it. So if
Mm.
you make them feel you are very valuable, you're very strong, and you are super powerful, and you can be the best in your line, and you can be the best in your job, and you can, well, and a part of them is going, yeah, yeah, I mean, come on.
Mm.
So it's unreasonable, and this is why, partly why I have a little bit of resistance with positivity in psychology, and particularly affirmations, because
Yeah.
no matter how much you affirm how much value you have, if maybe your line is not going to be into I am the most valuable of them all, but it's actually going into a healthy humility, and understand that there is some powerful forces in this universe, that they are guiding our destiny and our harmony with the nature, with the people around, and we can be in service of these forces, and that's very commendable as well. Somebody who can surrender in such a way with such humility. So we don't need to make the person bigger, but uh, so that's what we have to evaluate person to person, no? But we do that through the words, by listening and calibrating when are they crossing that line and going to the other side. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, but and that's the process of also conscious listening, uh, and deep listening. And that are we able to listen for that? Because I think most of us are listening to respond versus listening to really just listen, hold space, understand, or create connection in fully understanding what's transpiring for the person in front of us. And then we have our own filters and evaluations that are going with it. And sometimes these words may get lost in translation, literally, between two people. But the words are conveying so much of what is happening for that person within them. But what has become also, again, taking us back to awareness is, am I becoming aware of the words that I'm using? And what is that saying about the way I see myself?
Mm,
Therefore, what is the relationship with myself and the way I see myself? Because then that takes me into how much of our time, because we don't have this relationship with the words we use, or the awareness that I'm using these words sometimes from two places, whether there's an agenda or is it from authenticity and truth. And I think of it as, notice it as, am I seeking validation and approval, and therefore
mm,
these are the words that I'm using, that's how I'm going to get it? Or are these words that are a cry for help? Or, are these words, am I aware of the words I'm using in the way I see myself? And therefore, so much of my agenda for life may become a validation and approval, which we see a lot. We're all on that spectrum somewhere. Um,
And the thing is, even if you just use them for validation and approval, they become a reality. The more you use those words, they become a part of you. So maybe initially you don't do them, we in the vocabulary, like saying bad words or saying rubbish, saying a lot of F words. Maybe it's not part of who you truly are. You don't feel aligned with that. But the more you say it, that vibration generating, organizing, and destroying, it's going to be interiorized. And then you end up feeling like that. So you are like that. At the end, it is true. You are saying the truth, actually.
Can you explain that a little bit more, Ardash? Because that's really the whole essence of the power of words, right? How they
Yes.
become your truth, your reality, your vibration, and you start becoming. And I think Buddha said that you become your thoughts, right?
Yeah. So I think there is a lot within yoga about this, particularly mantra yoga. And if I may connect it back to languages, maybe it will be easy to connect it like that. Now, I speak a few languages, Spanish and Catalan and English and now Portuguese. And I've noticed that when I'm thinking in one language, I kind of feel in a different mood, and I may even reach different conclusions than if I'm thinking in another language. So language creates a setup for how your brain operates, and I think that's a very common thing. I don't know. Do you speak a few languages yourself? So have you experienced that? Have you had an experience like this, that you feel different when you are thinking about an issue in that language?
Um, to be very honest, I predominantly only think in English. And that's also because we come from a culture where my mom came from a different language, my father did, and the only joining factor was English, and our national language is something else. So we come from a culture with so many different languages. But because in my household, we never did, English became the predominant language of communication, thinking, and feeling. However, there are moments that I do notice that when I'm saying the same thing in English versus in my mother tongue versus the national language, they do completely different things for me.
All
I don't
right.
know much about the conclusion, but I know that they evoke different emotions and responses in me for sure.
Right. So, and we can see that in the stereotypical images of different people from different countries, right? You can see Germans, and you can, assume that a German is going to be in a particular way, has some certain attitude, no, and the precision of his words and the character that he's able to analyze something, but there is also the philosopher behind, and you can kind of feel it in that way. I'm somebody who is speaking French. You will see it in their rebel attitude towards life and self-understanding and self-determination, and a number of qualities that will go associated with the language, no? And you can feel the passion and the fire in Spanish people. You can feel it in the sound that we produce. So language affects the brain in different ways, and I will even say affects the consciousness in different ways. Now, jumping to consciousness. Now, uh, the language of some very old languages like Sanskrit will have been constructed in such a way that they stimulate the whole of the upper palate, and they produce a great range of sounds that we humans can produce. A range of sounds that is not covered by, for example, in Spanish. Spanish is a subset of that big range of sounds, and Sanskrit and German will be another subset, and English will be another subset. But Sanskrit contains all these sets, all those sounds. There's a few languages which have other sounds which are not in Sanskrit, but these sounds, the way they are produced, when you read something in Sanskrit, when you are chanting a mantra, basically, you are stimulating the whole of the brain, because the whole of the brain is mapped within all these sounds. And in fact, it is said in yoga, in mantra yoga, we say that Sanskrit was not invented; it was discovered by exploring what kind of sounds can we produce, and what vibration does it produce on me, and what activation does it produce. Now I'm talking also on energetic level and chakras and things like that, but it's trying to stimulate the whole brain and in a very particular way. So This is first of all why we don't translate mantras. We chant them in the original language, because the moment you translate it to your language, you really lost that capacity to activate the whole of the brain. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is that words have power, like we were saying. And if somebody says a bad word many, many, many times in their communication, they become that, or their life becomes like that. Your life is effed up if you F a lot, right? So that's happening as you are incorporating that word into your language. And actually, a good exercise that sometimes we suggest in yoga is, what do you want more in your life? Do you want more love? Do you want more peace? Do you want more what? Health? Whatever you want, just put that word in your communication more often. So
Mm,
if you want more love, make sure you use the word love at least 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 times a day.
mm,
And that's something that sometimes people get very surprised by this simple exercise, because they say, well, of course I want more love. But then you ask, okay, yesterday, how many times do you use that word? And not a single time, maybe, right? And then you want love, but then you don't even want it in your mouth. So why not say the word and then becomes more part of you?
mm,
So having this idea that the words that we produce are going to be more into our psyche, and they're going to come down, and they're not just that I'm going to be vibrating them, but also it's going to have an effect in the brain. So in the same way, some mantras have been designed in such a way. My own translation of the word mantras, my own definition of the word is equations of consciousness. That's a
mm.
very engineer yogi kind of definition. I'm an engineer, I'm
Yes.
a yogi, so equations of consciousness, because they are perfect. And when you chant Om Taratutare to the Soha, or when you chant Om Namah Shivaya, or when you chant Om Sohang, these sounds, they are designed so that when you chant this one, and then chant this one, and then you chant this one, and you chant this one, it has this particular effect on your brain, and it stimulates you into that particular state of consciousness. And that goes beyond the meaning of the words themselves. So even if I'm chanting Om Namah Shivaya, and that is, bowing to the Lord Destructor of the universe, I mean, that can be quite dark. But
Mm,
actually, when you chant it and you realize that you are energizing all your chakras through those syllables, because every syllable is designed to tune every one of your chakras. So that's why it's such a powerful mantra. When you chant it, is power empowering all the chakras, no? So mantras are perfect equations, perfect formulas, like a magic word, like a password to open a secret door to a treasure that you don't even know it's in your psyche, it's in your mind, it's actually in your consciousness. And by repeating those words again and again and again, you are tuning in the brain, you're filtering out all the rubbish and all the F words, and you're starting to open all these secret doors to some areas of the brain that are treasures and that we are not aware of until we start producing the sound. So that's why, even in Spain, we chant the mantras in Sanskrit or Gurmukhi or whatever old language it is, because there is something very powerful in utilizing that original language.
yeah, that's beautiful, and thank you for explaining that, because I've been trying to remind myself and clients that, especially because we work with trauma, and when we grow up with either emotional abuse and things like that, it's verbally using words that are harsh, that have an impact, then which is coming back to the power of words and what that can create in that choice, and keeping in mind of what you want to create. If you want to create more love, then use more love, which I think is such a
Mm,
beautiful simple thing.
mm.
Whereas we want love, but we're doing more criticism, more I hate this, I don't want this, the more rejecting words that we're using unknowingly and unconsciously, and how that actually creates actually your brain patterns and your neural pathways, right? And your sense of identity comes from the words that you hear growing up, right?
So can I just say one thing there, because I made a slight criticism of positivity and affirmations. And I would say this is the other side of the coin. Because if you growing up haven't learned to love yourself, well, saying these kind of sentences like, I love myself, could be at the beginning of a reprogramming as well. So there is something valuable in that as well.
Yeah. And it has to start somewhere. It's almost like you have to teach yourself to do something that you haven't learned before, to counteract a very, sticky identity and narrative that you've inherited based on maybe the words that were told to you if you grew up in a critical environment or an abusive environment. Because second aspect of that is many of the people who go through that lose their voice, lose the power of authentic speech, and become an using of words and language as a form of survival, or not speaking at all to the truth, and then what that happens in the body.
Like, for example,
For example, if I grew up in an environment where you're not allowed to ask questions, you're told to shut up all the time,
right?
or given the message that leave it, the elders know you don't have an opinion. Then I grow up believing that my words don't matter, my opinions don't matter, and I may lose my authentic voice.
Mm,
And that's a
mm.
big part of a lot of cultures, and that unknowingly that is trauma, and a lot of that is therefore then me keeping myself quiet and not using my words. Um, eh, Even speaking becomes very, very difficult. Um, I don't even know if my opinions and words matter. And so things
Yes.
like affirmations can be possibly a starting point of trying to reprogram what has been programmed and conditioned, where I'm speaking out of fear and not love, or I'm not speaking at all because fear has become my general internal experience and narrative, and my relationship with words and voice has changed. It's no
Yeah,
longer.
I think that's also very relevant for women, particularly, right? Because in some cultures, women should not have a voice. They should not voice their opinions. You shut up, is the men who are talking right now. Even to back to the generation of my mother, they would experience something like this. So, where is your voice? What is your value? No.
Absolutely. And then what is the implication of that to the way we speak to ourselves, and the words we use are purely to for survival, or not speaking at all is the only way to survive? And how then the impact of say an affirmation or the use of mantras can actually change that. Because for me mantra became a lot more than looking at it as, yes, there are syllables that are very powerful that reactivate the brain, but if mantras do that, then everything we speak is also a mantra, right? Because in that sense it's creating our reality and our narrative. So I was kind of sitting with people from uh, with trauma backgrounds and asking, if all your words were mantras and your words that you use were mantras, what kind of a language would you start speaking? How would you use those words differently with yourself to create an experience for yourself where um, the body recognizes safety in the way you speak to yourself? Because how we are spoken to becomes a lot of our internal voice. And that's the words then we start using, coming back to the self deprecation. That's the identity I hold. And then that identity is something that we get stuck to. And then for the rest of the life, we're trying to prove that we're not that thing. Like if my identity is rooted in I'm not good enough, for the rest of my life, I'm trying to prove that I am.
Mm.
And therefore, how important it becomes to look at everything that we say as mantras. And that's just a way that I've been sort of thinking about this. Um, and therefore, how would you speak to yourself if you thought that every word was a mantra and could has that power?
Yes, every word has that power. Every word is powerful. I wouldn't call them mantras, though some words become anti-mantras. Now, those are words to avoid.
Mm.
Not every word is going to have that perfect equation of consciousness that I meant. No, not every word is going to be like those which the rishis, the old seers from antiquity found these perfect formulas like Om Namah Shivaya or Ekonkar Satnam Karta Purak Nirvana, right? The Mul Mantra. Some have been found and some formulas are perfect. This is like the perfect recipe for this beautiful cake, right?
Mm.
And not every word can produce the same. You mix water and flour and butter and in a random quantity, and then you put some sugar and you mix it and you put it in the oven, and maybe it's not going to be so tasty, right? So not every word is has that capacity like mantras, but I get what you mean behind. It's like as if they were mantras. So with the same attitude, with the same consciousness, with the same intention, with the same, especially paying attention to how words are matter and they have power. So can we stand behind our words? Can we say, look, if in 200 years somebody came to you and said, do you remember you said those words? You will say, yes, I said them, right? Take responsibility for what I say, what comes through my mouth. And that means, be very, very aware and be conscious. Sometimes we say, it's like, imagine that somebody is recording you 24 hours a day, like, which is kind of like a scary thought that is not probably not so far from the truth nowadays with social media and so on. But can you stand up by whatever comes out through your mouth? And that's an incredible attitude. If we can commit to say, well, okay, if I'm going to say something, I'm going to make sure that you know, later on in a few years or in another situation, another context, I'm going to be able to say, yes, I said those words. So that's a lot of commitment and utilizing the words with the same consciousness as when we are chanting the mantras, yeah, and avoiding the anti-mantras, those words which are just feeding the narrative of the self-deprecation or whatever negative narrative we have inside.
Yeah, because so much of that impacts our nervous system, right? If I'm always being rude and mean to myself, then I am living in a constant state of fear and I'm believing those words to be true. I'm believing that that is who I am, and then that is how I'm going to behave and show up in the world. And that
And
is,
it's happening and it's creating that.
yes,
And it eventually happens by doing that.
exactly, because that's then how you begin to believe and operate if you're going to start working. And then how do you change that experience of recognizing that those are words and that you can change those by observing them and, creating a different internal experience? Because then that becomes the frequency at which you vibrate as a human being as well. And that's, I think, um, looking at living more consciously and through consciousness of what I want to, whether then the words, because then the words that come out of my mouth out of that fear are very different than if I'm standing, like you said, with consciousness that every word that comes out, can I stand behind it?
I
Uh,
think a good beginning for people who struggle with this is because I can put myself in the place of some people who hear those words and they find it extremely difficult to just command their own voice and their words and their own words.
mm,
I think a good beginning is to learn how to sing, learn how to chant,
mm,
because even before you want to accept the words that come out through your mouth, can you accept your voice, just your voice?
mm,
So exposing yourself to places where you are allowed to sing, that can be very healing, very therapeutic. I remember in a yoga class, I remember I was teaching in a gym, which is not the best place to teach yoga, but okay, I was doing that for a while. And I remember there was this gentleman who was coming very regularly. And one day, after a few years after class, he came and said, "You know why I like this yoga classes, these classes that you teach? You know why I come back every day?" He says, "It's because you let me sing." And
mm,
and and we only sing a little bit at the beginning and a little bit at the end. Some meditations had some more singing, but he says, even ever since I was very little, I was told you cannot sing. You have bad voice. You shouldn't make any, don't sing. Even in the choir in the school, they would say, you don't sing. You just move the mouth. And he had this trauma just coming to yoga and being able to say just oh that sound and being able to produce it and hear himself, that was already therapeutic to him. So I would say that even before we tune into the speech, the words that we say, and start calibrating that, I think just producing sound, hearing my own voice,
mm,
that can already be very, very healing. And learning how to produce the voice properly with how to engage the navel and how to, build your lung capacity and project your voice. Only that that's already giving you the right posture. If we look at the posture of singers, when they teach you how to sing, the posture of the body is very much a yogic posture. You can see the position of the shoulders, of the head. It's a very yogic posture, which is a very healthy position to start getting your voice out. And look, there's nothing closer to you than the voice, no? When you get your voice out, it's like I was saying, the internal is the mind as it comes out. That's what is coming through me. Wow. And being able to get your voice out, that can be extremely healing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just hearing the thoughts in your head, which is where therapy began, right? And to able to say that out loud in itself is such a therapeutic experience. And then to able to listen to yourself with what you've said and connect with it. And one is connection, and then the other is to own it.
Yes,
Is
definitely.
an even deeper experience of connecting back to the self, back to who I am, and the words that I speak stand for who I am.
Correct.
And it was really interesting because the other day I had this conversation with someone, and the response that I got was, "Oh, then I have to think about everything I say." I said, "Yeah, think about that,
Mm, mm.
and imagine if you did, you would realize that
Imagine thinking before speaking. What kind of wild world is that?
it was radical for the person that
Yeah.
think before I speak, and I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Yes, maybe.
you know.
What can happen if you did that?
Oh, okay. Because I was like, there's so much of intention of what what you want to say, and the words so that it lands with authenticity. And is it your truth in this moment? All of those things are we don't even think about. There's no pause. We're just automatic in our responses. We are going from I'm barely hearing, it's barely landing. I'm not letting it see what it's doing for me and what is my truth. And before I even can take the next breath, I've given a reaction or response, and then I don't know if I can stand by that. And that is really what we are interacting with in this world today, which is where I see so much more conflict between people and between amongst ourselves internally, and that's where the first
Mm.
conflict begins, right? And that's where we live deeply at war with ourselves when what we say and how we show up don't match.
Right, that's another big topic. Mm.
Yeah, which I'm just
Yeah.
going to leave it there. Is there something you want to say on it? Because we can go on a complete different conversation
No, that's
in
definitely a big
that.
congruence between the inside and the outside.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just wanted to point out, I think it's something, I don't know if it's popular or psychology, or I don't know where it comes from. I know in yoga we say, don't say anything unless it's necessary, kind, and true. But I believe I have heard this concept of think before you speak, and
Mm.
think as the THINK. And T has to be true, helpful. I don't remember the E. The I, sorry, I don't know. I don't remember what the I was, but necessary and kind. So make
Intention.
sure that what was the E? The intention?
Yeah, intention.
Okay, so before saying anything, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it is it the right intention? Is it necessary? And if I'm gonna say it, I'm gonna say it kindly. So that's a powerful thing, and it would avoid a lot of messes in our lives, particularly in relationships with other people, where we say well, actually we hear the wrong thing because we are already in our inner dialogue, then we interpret it in the wrong way, and then we react in the worst possible way, and then we throw the words out there, and then we start the party, then the party starts, right? Yeah, a mess. And then that's how we create karma, like we say in yoga. Mm.
Mm.
But yeah, it's also this coherence, no, between what am I inside and what am I saying outside. And a lot of this coherence comes simply from, I think, something you touched upon before. How is it going to be received? How do I think that it's going to be received? And being fearful of the reception, so I have to adapt myself to get the acceptance that I need. And partly because I don't accept myself. So I need acceptance from the outside. I need to buy that acceptance with praise or with whatever words I'm using. And then I'm not being true to myself. So that T of think, the truthfulness, has to start from here. Is it true to me what I'm gonna say? And finding the coherence with the outside. So happy
Yeah.
to go into that coherence inside and out.
Well, I think that gives us yet another podcast topic to work with. I want to stay with what you just said because I think is really powerful to think about how we whether or not our what we are thinking and what we are saying, or what we are feeling and what we are saying match, and therefore am I saying my truth, or is it coming from an agenda, which is really about authentic and an agenda, and therefore also forget the conflict outside that may occur because of a reaction, but what about the conflict we live with within, and truly the disruption that causes within our human experience. Because so much of the conflict within is, should I say it, should I not say it, if I say it, what's going to happen, and a lot of it is, if we look at it, early experiences when it may not have been received, and then I've chosen to, in order to be safe, which again comes back to our basic needs of safety, security, and stability, that I'm constantly living out of that window, to see, is it safe to speak my truth? Is it safe to be authentic? And then what it does when we don't live by that truth. And how do I come closer to that truth? And I know that is a big part of the whole yogic experience. Uh, um, so if you could just share that in how um, we can come back to a more, whether there were any, suggestions like you'd given earlier, which were beautiful, that we can do to come back to that state of authenticity. I know in trauma, we really look at beliefs and what's in the way, and the traumas and things like that. But what about the yogi
I think
perspective?
it takes a lot of courage
Mm,
and strength, because it to say the truth, that's gonna have consequences.
mm,
Uh, that's why we say also, don't say something just because it's true. It has to be also necessary and kind. Yeah, if you're gonna say it, say it kindly. But I think there's quite a paradox there, because we can see this in our culture. It's a very modern concept, the not wanting to harm people's feelings. So
mm,
I'm not gonna say what I really feel in case somebody gets offended, and then nobody offends anyone, and then we are all very, what I think is called toxic positivity. We're all positive. Oh, you did so well. Everything is good. Oh, you did. Wow, excellent. Oh, yeah, you did a good job. And oh my God, what he did.
mm,
But no one is gonna say anything because everybody is very positive. But then there's no reality there. And then if you speak out and then you say the truth of what you feel, that's gonna offend someone. Well, in a way, I don't care too much if people get offended. I think it's necessary. We all need to, be offensive in some way. If I look at it in this way, if everything that we say and nobody gets offended, let's say you spend a whole year speaking and nobody gets offended, then I'm not doing my job. Because if we're going to tell the truth, if we're going to speak the truth, that's going to resonate with the truth within people. And
mm,
if we start from the definition of what the ego is, which we talked about the last podcast, ego by definition is a false identity.
mm,
So something that people identify with, which is false.
mm,
Now, if I'm going to be speaking the truth, and we will have a whole podcast about truth, we have to find out what this truth is. But let's just say it like that. If I'm going to be being truthful to myself and speaking to, hopefully, to the truth in the other, that's going to clash with their ego, and
mm,
that's going to create conflict. So if we never create conflict, if we never offend anyone, we are just scattering the ego. We are just hoping that the ego of the other one is happy with us,
mm,
probably to buy their affection or their attention or to feel this acceptance from the others. So it comes from the wrong place. But then it's a paradox, no? So I want to be truthful. At the same time, I want to have a real connection and conversation. And if they are if there's so many layers that are gonna be triggering things just by saying something that is truthful, then you have to check, okay, how much can I say? How much is it ready for the other one to hear? Sometimes it's very little. And then do I want to even go there if I don't have license to say anything? So it's a very paradoxical line between what is truth and what is not truth, what I communicate, what I don't communicate, if it's being offensive or not. You can get canceled very quickly in this world.
Absolutely. Um, and yet there are ways in which, like you shared earlier, that you can stick to, is it true, is it necessary, is it kind? And that can be the same, that can be the intent of what we say. And that's beautiful, because when your truth is speaking, or when your authenticity is speaking, it lands hopefully with the truth of the other. Um, and then if the ego does come in the way, then that's a different conversation to be had.
Yeah, because you don't want to be kind to the ego. You're being kind to the soul and the truth in the other.
Mm.
And that's the thing. When you communicate in that way and you're communicating something that is true and is necessary, but maybe the way I'm going to say it is not going to be kind to the ego. It's going to be kind to the soul, but sometimes the person needs to hear harsh words, and like they call brutal compassion, right? Or tough love. So so sometimes it has to be communicated in that way. But when you enter into the realm of tough love or brutal compassion, that's a very tricky realm, because you can create karma very quickly, and you can create hurt and harm very quickly. So it takes a lot of neutrality and courage, coming back to the courage and the strength inside to, okay, there might be a battle here, but I'm not afraid to offend. If it's going to offend them, it's going to offend them. I'm just going to say what I feel, and at least I'm going to be coherent to myself. And if I am distorted, then maybe the confrontation will help me recalibrate. I will also hear the whatever comes back. No, not to assume that we know the truth. Nobody else knows the truth. So we have to be able to recalibrate ourselves. But that will mean probably conflict sometimes, even though confrontation doesn't have to go into conflict, but which is an art, kind of, to be able to confront without conflict.
Yeah.
But conflict happens. We cannot be afraid of it.
Yeah, it's really interesting perspective, because when we do CI or in therapy, a particular form, it really talks about no tough love. Actually, there's love is just love. And that when you're speaking from love, it naturally lands as love with the other person. And therefore, the words that you use will come from that intention. And if the intention is to land with truth, um, that's how it lands. And if it doesn't, then you recognize that your intention was clear. And for most part, that's the really important aspect that we use. um
But have you heard this saying, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions"?
yes.
So just the intention is not enough,
No,
because
of
you
course, intention
because
backed by the words that you use is really important. And therefore, I think one of the things I learned is to take a deep breath before we speak. Instead of um, just speaking the words, right, without clarity of what is the truth that I'm feeling. So there's a lot of pauses, I think, that is also required in those conversations, but also that when you're speaking your truth, it doesn't have to be accusatory, blame, or any of
right,
these, without
right,
judgment. Therefore, keeping those aspects in mind, because I just want to make sure that what you said is not that it's okay to then accuse someone, blame someone, or judge someone, or then, abuse someone, because that's not what you're saying.
mm,
Uh, when you're saying you're speaking your truth because you did this to me and you did that, that's not, I think, what you mean. If
correct, yeah,
if I'm being just clarifying that here,
yeah.
because it is with the intention to speak your truth with maybe that it felt this for me, or this is my experience of what just occurred, or had occurred, without any blame, judgment, or accusation, or diminishing someone's dignity and things like that. um, am I
Yes,
on.
I'm just feeling how it happened the same as the last podcast we had. We touched upon truth again, and we wanted to go into it. And we know we have a podcast program for our relationship to truth coming up. That will be something to look up to, look forward to. So
Look up to truth as well.
yeah,
Call them Freudian slips.
yes. Well, or inability to grasp the English language. Yeah.
Yeah, so coming back, I think towards the essence of what we were talking today about how words are powerful and how we can be more intentional in using these words and how they um, impact not just us but what we create around us. And you talked about mantras, and we talked about vibrations, and we talked about the internal as well as the external. Um, and I wanted to talk about how actually words can mean different things in different cultures, the same words, and how that can play out in its own way. But in just the interest of the time that we have together today, is there something that, Adashi, that you feel very strongly when it comes to words, or you're passionate about, that you would like to share before as just a thought or a thinking point or just a message? To everyone who's listening.
I would say don't be afraid of the silence and befriend the silence so we can hear better our inner voice, which is going to be a nice connection to next week's when we talk about the essence within, to be able to hear that inner voice. Do you have a message for our audience?
It's um yeah, I think it would be similar because it was very interesting how there was a couple of seconds of silence before you responded. And just inviting people to enjoy and savor the silence. Um, that we don't always have to be doing and moving and shuffling, but just enjoying the silence so that we can listen to what is the truth within. Um, so just that voice that you said.
It's like the last week we were talking about how when you sit to meditate, you are in the silence and you are alone with your thoughts. And that can be very confronting. But again, you know, confrontation doesn't have to be a conflict. It may be at the beginning as we sit in silence and we are confronted with the things that happen within us. Just like paying attention to the words that come through our mouths can be confronting, no? When somebody tells you, "Did you just notice you said that word?" But eventually you can be a friend of the silence. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, the power of silence and the power of awareness, bringing us back into our own power to create the words that we want to create more of, which is if you want to create more love, use more love in the language that you use on a daily basis.
That's right.
So thank you so much. It's been a joy speaking to you, Ardaas ji.
Thank
And
you
to
very
everyone
much.
listening, we will be back here next Friday at
Yes.
5:30 p.m. India time.
Yes, this at 1 in Central European time.
And we will be talking about the soul, the essence, and a lot more. We're going in deeper towards ourselves. So thank you, everyone, for joining
Thank
us.
you, everyone. And if anybody wants to ask any question or wants us to talk about any topic, you can feel free to connect when we are online and ask us directly in the chat, or just drop us a line in the video, and then we will reply to you maybe in the next conversation. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Nyana.
Thank you, Ardaas ji.